What if I told you that every Halloween night, while kids are trick-or-treating and having fun, something dark is watching from the shadows? What if I told you that behind every mask, behind every costume, there could be something that isn't human at all? Tonight, I'm going to share 5 true stories that happened on Halloween night. These aren't made-up tales. These are real experiences from real people who came face-to-face with pure terror when they least expected it. Before we start, I need to warn you, these stories are not for the weak. If you're alone right now, you might want to turn on some lights. Check your doors. Make sure they're locked, because after hearing these stories, you'll never look at Halloween the same way again. And the scariest part? Every single word you're about to hear is true. Story 1. The Man in the Vintage Clown Costume. This story comes from Sarah, a 23-year-old woman living in a quiet neighborhood in Ohio. The kind of place where everyone knows everyone, where kids play in the streets until dark, and where nothing bad ever happens. Or at least that's what everyone thought until Halloween night 2019. Sarah was home alone that night. Her roommate had gone to a party downtown, one of those crowded bar events where everyone dresses up and drinks too much. But Sarah wasn't in the mood for crowds and noise. She had just broken up with her boyfriend of 2 years, and she wanted a quiet night. Just her, some wine, and whatever scary movies were on TV. She thought staying home would be safe. She thought wrong. The neighborhood was buzzing with Halloween energy. Every house had decorations. Some went simple with just a few pumpkins, but others went all out. The Johnson family across the street had turned their entire front yard into a graveyard, complete with fog machines and motion-activated zombies that jumped out at kids. The Martinez house had giant spider webs, covering their entire roof with a massive inflatable spider that moved in the wind. Sarah loved it all. She had always loved Halloween, ever since she was a little girl. She had bought 5 bags of candy, the good stuff too. Full-size Snickers bars, Reese's cups, and Kit Kats. She remembered being a kid and how exciting it was to get full-size candy bars instead of those tiny fun-size ones. She wanted to be the cool house, the one kids remembered. The first trick-or-treaters came around 6 o'clock, right as the sun was setting. A group of tiny princesses, all from the same family, their mom standing at the sidewalk with a tired smile. Sarah gave them each 2 candy bars, and their eyes lit up like Christmas morning. For the next 2 hours, it was perfect. Groups of kids came and went. Superheroes, witches, zombies, even a kid dressed as a washing machine, which made Sarah laugh for the first time in weeks. Parents waved from the sidewalk. Everyone was friendly, happy, normal. Around 8 o'clock, things started to slow down. The younger kids were heading home for bedtime. Only the older kids were still out. Teenagers without costumes just looking for free candy. Sarah didn't mind. She had plenty left. She was refilling her candy bowl when the doorbell rang at exactly 8:47 p.m. She remembers the time because she had just checked her phone, hoping for a text from her ex that never came. She grabbed the bowl and opened the door with her practiced smile, ready to compliment another costume. But the smile died on her face immediately. Standing on her porch was a man. Not a teenager, not a dad with kids, but a grown man, alone. He was tall, maybe 6 feet 2 or 3, wearing a clown costume that looked ancient. Not vintage in a cool way, but old in a wrong way. The fabric was some kind of rough material, maybe canvas, stained with things Sarah didn't want to identify. The colors had faded to sick pastels, baby blue and pink and yellow, all wrong for a clown costume. The makeup on his face was cracked and peeling, showing dark skin underneath. Not normal skin, but something that looked almost green in the porch light. His red nose was hanging off to one side, held on by what looked like a piece of old tape. The wig was matted and tangled, more brown than orange now, with things moving in it. Bugs maybe, or something worse. But the worst part was his smile. It wasn't painted on. He was actually smiling, his real mouth stretching impossibly wide under the makeup. His teeth were wrong, too many of them, and they were all different sizes, like he had stolen teeth from different people and shoved them into his mouth. Some were white, some were yellow, some were black with rot. And his eyes. God, his eyes were completely black. Not just the pupils, but everything. Like looking into holes that went on forever. "Trick or treat," he said. And his voice was wrong too. It sounded like multiple voices talking at once, some high, some low, all slightly out of sync with each other. Sarah's hand was shaking so hard the candy in the bowl was rattling. Every instinct in her body was screaming at her to slam the door, to run, to do anything but stand there. But she was frozen, like a mouse in front of a snake. "Aren't you a little old for trick-or-treating?" she managed to whisper, trying to joke, trying to make this normal somehow. The man's smile got wider, so wide she could see his jaw unhinging like a snake's. "Age is just a number," he said in that horrible multiple voice. "I've been trick-or-treating for longer than you can imagine. Longer than this town has existed. Longer than your grandparents' grandparents were alive." He held out a bag, but it wasn't a normal trick-or-treat bag. It looked like it was made of skin, human skin. Sarah could see hair still attached to parts of it, and what might have been a tattoo stretched and distorted. "I don't want candy," he continued. "Candy is for children. I'm here for something else. What do you want?" Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. "I want you to come with me," he said. "I want to show you what real Halloween is like. The Halloween from before, when the veil was thin and things could cross over, when sacrifices were made to keep the dark things happy. I want to take you to the place where every day is Halloween and the party never stops." That broke Sarah's paralysis. She slammed the door and locked it, then ran to the back door to make sure it was locked too. She grabbed her phone to call 911, but when she looked at the screen, it was static. Not broken, but showing actual static like an old TV. She looked through the peephole, and he was still there, standing perfectly still on her porch. Not moving at all, not even breathing that she could see, just standing and smiling that terrible smile. She ran upstairs to her bedroom and looked out the window. He was still there. She watched for an hour, then 2. He never moved, never shifted his weight, never even blinked, just stood there like a statue. Finally, at exactly midnight, he turned and walked away. But the way he walked was wrong too. His legs bent in too many places like he had extra joints. His head turned all the way around to look back at the house while his body walked forward. Sarah didn't sleep that night. She sat in her bedroom with all the lights on, holding a kitchen knife, waiting for the sun to come up. When it finally did, she went outside to check the porch. There were footprints burned into the wood of her porch where he had stood. Not shoe prints, but actual footprints, like he had been barefoot. The prints had too many toes, and they were still hot to the touch. Next to them, scratched into her front door, were the words, "See you next Halloween." Sarah moved out 2 weeks later, stayed with her parents for a while, then got an apartment on the other side of town. But it didn't matter. The next Halloween at exactly 8:47 p.m. he was there, standing at her new door, wearing the same costume, smiling the same smile. She didn't answer this time, just hid in her bathroom with the lights off until midnight. This happened again the next year, and the next. Each time he found her no matter where she was. Each time the costume looked older, more decayed. Each time his smile got wider and his teeth got worse. Last year, something changed. When he showed up at 8:47 p.m., he wasn't alone. Behind him stood 3 other figures, all in similar ancient, rotting clown costumes, all with the same black eyes and 2 wide smiles. "We're running out of patience," he said through the door. Sarah hadn't opened it, but she could hear him perfectly, like he was standing right next to her. "1 more year. Next Halloween, you come with us, or we come in for you." That was last year. Halloween is in 2 days now, and Sarah has tried everything. She bought plane tickets to Australia, but the flight was canceled. She tried to check into a psychiatric hospital for the night, but they said they were full. She even tried to get herself arrested, but the police just laughed and sent her home. She knows he's coming. They're all coming, and this time, she doesn't think a locked door is going to stop them. Story 2. The trick-or-treater who wasn't there. This story is about Mike, a single father living in suburban Pennsylvania with his 7-year-old daughter Emma. Mike had been raising Emma alone since his wife died in a car accident when Emma was just 2 years old. Halloween 2021 was supposed to be special. It was the first year Emma really understood what Halloween was all about, and she had been planning her costume since August. Emma wanted to be a witch, but not just any witch. She wanted to be a good witch, with a sparkly purple dress and a pointed hat covered in stars. Mike couldn't sew to save his life, but he tried. He spent 3 weeks working on that costume every night after Emma went to bed. He watched YouTube tutorials, pricked his fingers 1,000 times with the needle, and even hot-glued fake gems onto the hat one by one. It wasn't perfect, but Emma loved it. That was all that mattered. Halloween night came, and Emma was so excited she could barely eat dinner. She kept running to the window to see if it was dark enough to start trick-or-treating yet. Mike had mapped out their route, hitting all the houses that gave out the best candy first before they got cleaned out. He had done this same route when he was a kid 30 years ago. Some things never change in small towns. They headed out at 6 o'clock, right as the streetlights were coming on. The weather was perfect for Halloween. Cool enough to need a jacket, but not cold enough to be uncomfortable. There was a little bit of fog rolling in from the woods at the edge of town, giving everything that perfect spooky atmosphere. The streets were packed with families, kids running from house to house with their bags getting heavier with each stop. Parents standing in groups, chatting and sipping coffee or something stronger from travel mugs. Everyone knew everyone here. Mike had grown up with half these parents, went to high school with them, played on the same little league teams. They had been out for about an hour when Emma noticed her. The little girl in white. Emma pulled on Mike's hand and pointed across the street. "Dad, look at that girl's costume. It's so pretty." Mike looked where Emma was pointing and felt his blood run cold. Standing on the sidewalk across the street was a little girl, maybe 8 or 9 years old, completely alone. She was wearing a white dress that seemed to glow in the streetlight. Not a costume white dress with fake blood or tears like you'd expect on Halloween, but a perfect, pristine white dress that looked like it was from another time, maybe the 1920s or 1930s, with lace and ribbons and tiny pearl buttons. The dress was too clean. That was what bothered Mike first. Kids had been running around for an hour. Their costumes were getting dirty, chocolate-stained, torn from catching on bushes. But this girl's dress was perfect, like she had just put it on seconds ago. "Where are her parents?" Mike asked out loud, looking around. He couldn't see any adults near her. In fact, now that he looked closer, other families were walking past her like she wasn't even there. A group of teenagers walked right through the spot where she was standing. Not around her, through her. "Can we go talk to her?" Emma asked. "She looks lonely." Something in Mike's chest tightened. Every parental instinct he had was screaming danger, but he couldn't explain why. She was just a little girl in a white dress. What could be dangerous about that? "Let's keep going, sweetheart," Mike said, trying to keep his voice normal. "We have a lot more houses to hit." But Emma kept looking back at the girl. "Dad, she's following us!" Mike turned around and his heart nearly stopped. The girl was following them, staying exactly 20 feet behind. When they walked, she walked. When they stopped, she stopped. Her face was pale. Too pale. Like all the blood had been drained from it. Her eyes were dark, but not brown or black. They were empty, like looking into deep holes. She wasn't walking normally either. Her feet weren't quite touching the ground, hovering maybe an inch above the pavement. Her dress didn't move like fabric should. It stayed perfectly still, even though there was a breeze. And the sound. Mike could hear footsteps, but they didn't match her movement. The footsteps sounded like hard shoes on pavement, but the girl was barefoot. "Dad, I'm scared," Emma whispered, pressing closer to him. "It's okay, baby. Let's just head home." They started walking faster, but the girl matched their pace perfectly, maintaining that exact 20-foot distance. Mike picked Emma up and started jogging. The girl moved faster too, gliding over the pavement like she was on wheels. They turned onto their street, and Mike was relieved to see their house just 3 doors down. But when he looked back, the girl was gone. She had vanished completely. The street was empty except for a few other trick-or-treaters in the distance. "Where did she go?" Emma asked, looking around. "I don't know, sweetie. Let's just get inside." They hurried into the house, and Mike locked the door behind them, then double-checked all the windows. Emma went to her room to sort through her candy, while Mike stood at the living room window, watching the street. Everything looked normal. Kids were still going house to house. Parents were still chatting. But Mike couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. Then Emma screamed. Mike ran to her room so fast he nearly tripped on the stairs. He burst through her door to find Emma standing at her window, pointing outside with tears streaming down her face. The girl in white was standing in their backyard, looking up at Emma's window. But here's what made Mike's blood turn to ice. Their backyard was completely fenced in with a 6-foot privacy fence. The gate was padlocked from the inside. There was no way anyone could get in there without climbing the fence, and even then, Mike would have heard it. The fence was old and creaky. Mike ran outside, grabbing a baseball bat from the garage on the way. But by the time he got to the backyard, she was gone. No sign of her anywhere. The gate was still locked. There were no footprints in the grass, which was still wet from the sprinklers that morning. It was like she had never been there at all. Mike brought Emma into his room that night. She was too scared to sleep alone. They left all the lights on, and Mike stayed awake, watching the windows. Around 3 a.m, he saw her again. The girl in white was standing across the street, under the streetlight, looking up at their house. She stood there until the sun came up, then vanished the moment the first ray of sunlight hit her. The next day, Mike asked around the neighborhood. Nobody else had seen a girl in a white dress. Nobody was missing a child. Mike even called the police to report it, but they said without any crime being committed, there was nothing they could do. That's when old Mrs. Henderson from 3 houses down told him something that changed everything. She had lived in the neighborhood for 60 years, and she had heard stories. Every Halloween, going back decades, people reported seeing a little girl in a white dress. Always the same description. Always following families with young children. Always disappearing without a trace. Mrs. Henderson showed Mike an old newspaper clipping from 1991. A 9-year-old girl named Lucy Morrison had been killed on Halloween night in 1990. She had been trick-or-treating alone, which was more common back then, when a drunk driver hit her. She died instantly. She had been wearing a white dress that her mother had made for her. The picture in the newspaper showed a smiling little girl who looked exactly like the one who had followed them. But here's the thing that made it worse. The article said Lucy had been killed on Maple Street. Mike and Emma lived on Maple Street. In fact, when Mike looked up the exact address, it was right in front of his house. Lucy had died right where they had first seen her. Emma didn't want to go trick-or-treating the next year. Or the year after that. She's 10 now, and she still won't go out on Halloween, because she says she still sees the girl sometimes, standing across the street, waiting. And sometimes, late at night, Emma says she can hear a voice outside her window, asking if she wants to come trick-or-treating. Mike has tried everything. They've moved twice, but the girl always finds them on Halloween. They've left town for Halloween, but Emma still sees her in dreams. They've had the house blessed, but it didn't help. Last week, Emma came to Mike crying. She said Lucy had been in her room, not outside but inside, standing at the foot of her bed. Lucy had said she was lonely, that she had been trick-or-treating alone for over 30 years, and she just wanted a friend. She wanted Emma to come with her, to trick-or-treat forever. Emma asked what she should do. Mike didn't know what to tell her, because Halloween is tomorrow, and Mike has a terrible feeling that this year, Lucy won't take no for an answer. Story 3. The House That Shouldn't Exist. Marcus was 17 in 2020, living in a small town in Maine where nothing ever happened. Halloween that year was weird because of COVID. Most official events were canceled, and lots of parents weren't letting their kids trick-or-treat. But Marcus and his friends were teenagers. They thought they were invincible, and they were bored out of their minds after months of lockdown. There were 4 of them that night. Marcus, his best friend Tyler, Tyler's girlfriend Jessica, and their friend David. They met up around 10 o'clock, after their parents thought they were in bed. The plan was simple. Walk around town, maybe egg some houses, probably just hang out and talk. They all wore masks, not costume masks, but COVID masks, though Tyler had drawn vampire fangs on his. They decided to walk through the old part of town, where the really old houses were. Some of those houses dated back to the 1700s, built by the original settlers. They were huge, beautiful in a creepy way, with architecture you didn't see anymore. Widows' walks on the roofs, servants' quarters, root cellars that connected to underground tunnels from when the Underground Railroad ran through Maine. The streets were empty. No trick-or-treaters this late, no adults walking dogs, no cars. Just the 4 of them walking under streetlights that had been installed in the 1950s and barely updated since. The fog was thick that night, rolling in from the ocean, making everything look like a movie. They had been walking for about 30 minutes, just talking and joking around, when Tyler stopped suddenly in the middle of the sidewalk. What the hell? They all looked where he was pointing. Between the Henderson house and the Morrison house, 2 homes they had walked past hundreds of times, there was another house. But that was impossible. Marcus knew for a fact there had always been an empty lot there. He had cut through it just last week as a shortcut to David's house. But now there was a house. And not a new house, but an old one, older than the houses around it. The paint was black, or had been black once. Now it was peeling off in strips, showing rotting wood underneath. The windows were tall and narrow, like eyes, and most of them were broken. The front door was hanging open just a crack. An orange light was flickering from inside. "That's not possible," David said, stating what they were all thinking. "I was literally here yesterday skating, and that was an empty lot." "Maybe we're on the wrong street," Jessica suggested. But they all knew they weren't. They could see the Hendersons' lawn gnome collection on one side and the Morrisons' ridiculous fountain on the other. They were in the right place, but somehow there was a house that hadn't been there before. "We should check it out," Tyler said. "Are you insane?" Marcus asked. "We're not going in there." But Tyler was already walking up the path to the front door. The path itself was wrong. It was made of stones that looked wet and slimy, even though it hadn't rained in days. Dead leaves covered the path, but they were fresh, like they had just fallen. All the trees in the neighborhood had been bare for weeks. The rest of them followed Tyler, not because they wanted to, but because they didn't want him to go alone. That's how it always was with Tyler. He did something stupid, and the rest of them followed to make sure he didn't die. Tyler pushed the door open, and it made the longest, loudest creak Marcus had ever heard. It went on for way too long, like the door was bigger than it looked. Inside, they could see a hallway lit by gas lamps on the walls. Actual gas lamps with real flames, not electric ones made to look old. The wallpaper was peeling, showing dark wood underneath that looked wet and rotten. The smell hit them immediately. Sweet and rotten at the same time, like flowers at a funeral home mixed with meat that had gone bad. "Hello?" Tyler called out. "Anyone home?" No answer. But they heard something. Music. Old music, like from the 1920s, playing from somewhere upstairs. It was scratchy and distorted, speeding up and slowing down randomly, like a record player that was broken. They stepped inside, and that's when things got really weird. The house was furnished like it was still the 1920s. Everything was covered in dust so thick it looked like snow, but underneath the dust, everything looked expensive. There were portraits on the walls, oil paintings in gold frames. But the people in the portraits were wrong. Their faces were too long, their eyes too big, their mouths too small. And their eyes seemed to follow the group as they walked. "This is wrong," Jessica whispered. "We need to leave." But Tyler was already heading up the stairs. "Just a quick look," he said. "Then we'll go." The stairs creaked with every step, but not normal creaking. It sounded like the wood was screaming. The music got louder as they climbed, but also more distorted. Marcus could make out words now. A woman singing about love and death, but her voice kept changing pitch, going from normal to demonic and back again. At the top of the stairs was a long hallway with doors on both sides. All the doors were closed except for one at the end, where orange light was flickering. As they walked down the hallway, Marcus noticed something that made his stomach drop. In the thick dust on the floor there were footprints. Fresh footprints, maybe an hour old. But they weren't human footprints. They were too long, with what looked like claw marks at the toes. And they weren't walking in a straight line. They went up the walls and across the ceiling in some places. Tyler reached the door at the end and pushed it open. Inside was a bedroom, but everything was wrong. The furniture was on the ceiling. The bed, the dresser, the chairs, all hanging upside down like gravity had reversed. But there was a table on the floor with a candle burning on it, and the record player was on the floor too, playing that horrible music. And then they saw her. In the corner of the room, standing on the ceiling like it was the floor, was a woman in a white nightgown. Her hair was hanging up toward the floor, defying gravity. Her skin was gray and mottled like a corpse. Her eyes were solid white. No pupils, no iris, just white. She smiled at them, and her mouth opened too wide, showing rows and rows of teeth like a shark. "You came to my party," she said in a voice that sounded like it was coming from underwater. How wonderful. It's been so long since I had guests. That's when they ran. No discussion, no planning, just pure terror-driven running. Down the stairs, through the hallway, out the door. They kept running until their lungs burned and their legs gave out. When they finally stopped and looked back, the house was gone. There was just the empty lot, exactly as it had always been. The same weeds, the same broken fence, the same for sale sign that had been there for years. They stood there for a long time, trying to understand what had just happened. Then David pointed out something that made everything worse. All their phones showed the same time, 10:15 p.m. But they had been in that house for what felt like at least an hour. According to their phones, only 5 minutes had passed since they left Marcus's house. They never talked about it much after that night. Tyler and Jessica broke up a few weeks later. David's family moved away suddenly. Something about his dad's job. Marcus still lives in that town, but he never walks past that empty lot anymore, because sometimes, out of the corner of his eye, he can see it. The house that shouldn't exist, and in the second-floor window he can see her, the woman in white, still standing on the ceiling, still smiling, still waiting for her guests to come back to the party. Marcus did some research, spent hours in the library looking through old newspapers and town records. He found something that made his blood run cold. In 1928, there had been a house at that address. On Halloween night, 1928, there was a party. Something went wrong. The newspaper articles were vague, but apparently everyone at the party died. The house burned down, but the bodies were never found. The owner was a woman named Elizabeth Blackwood, who was known for throwing elaborate parties. There was one survivor, a man who had left early. He told police that something was wrong with the house, that rooms led to places they shouldn't, that he saw things that couldn't exist. The police thought he was drunk or crazy. He left town soon after and was never heard from again. Marcus found his diary in the Historical Society archives. The last entry, dated November 1st, 1928, said, "The house is still there. I can see it when I close my eyes. She's still having her party, and she's waiting for more guests. God help anyone who accepts her invitation. Tomorrow is Halloween again." Marcus has been getting dreams about the house. In the dreams, he's walking through those impossible hallways, hearing that music, seeing her smile, and every time she says the same thing. "The party isn't over. Come back. Stay this time. Stay forever." Marcus is planning to leave town for Halloween, but he has a feeling it won't matter, because last night he woke up to find dust on his floor, old dust, and in the dust were footprints. Not his footprints. They were too long, with claw marks at the toes. Story 4. The Children Who Came Too Late. Linda was 63 years old in 2018, living alone in a big colonial house in Connecticut. Her husband had died 3 years earlier from cancer, and her 3 children lived in different states with their own families. The house was too big for one person, 7 bedrooms, 4 bathrooms, a basement, and an attic full of 40 years of memories. But Linda couldn't bring herself to sell it. This was where she had raised her family, where all her memories lived. Halloween had always been Linda's favorite holiday. Even after her kids grew up and moved away, she still decorated the house like she did when they were young. She turned the front yard into a haunted graveyard, complete with foam tombstones, plastic skeletons, and speakers hidden in the bushes playing spooky sounds. She carved 15 pumpkins and lined them up along the driveway. She even dressed up as a witch every year, cackling at the kids when they came to the door. That Halloween started like every other. Linda had bought 20 bags of candy, way too much for the neighborhood, but she always liked to be prepared. She had full-size candy bars for the little kids and fun-size ones for the teenagers who showed up without costumes. The first trick-or-treaters arrived at 5:30, right as the sun was setting. It was a group of tiny superheroes with their dad, who looked more tired than scary in his store-bought zombie costume. Linda gave each kid 2 full-size Snickers bars, and their eyes went wide with excitement. For the next 4 hours, it was a steady stream of kids. Pirates, princesses, monsters, and characters Linda didn't recognize from shows she'd never heard of. She loved every minute of it, seeing the creativity in the homemade costumes, the excitement in the kids' eyes, the way they all yelled, "Thank you," as they ran back to their parents. By 9 o'clock, things had slowed down considerably. Maybe 1 or 2 groups in the last half hour, mostly older kids just looking for free candy. Linda was about to turn off her porch light when the doorbell rang one more time. She looked at the clock. 9:43 p.m. Pretty late for trick-or-treaters, but not unheard of. She grabbed the candy bowl and opened the door with a smile, ready to hand out some of the last pieces. There were 3 children standing on her porch. 2 boys and a girl, all looking about 10 or 11 years old, but something was immediately wrong with this picture. Their costumes were old. Not vintage or retro, but actually old, like they had been wearing them for decades. The fabric was rotting, hanging off their bodies in strips. The colors had faded to browns and grays, and the masks they wore were cracked and broken, showing glimpses of faces underneath that didn't look right. "Trick or treat," they said in unison, but their voices were wrong. They sounded hollow, like they were speaking from the bottom of a well. And they weren't quite in sync, like 3 recordings being played at slightly different speeds. Linda felt every hair on her body stand up. Something deep in her brain, some primitive survival instinct, was screaming at her to slam the door and run. But she stood there, frozen, holding the candy bowl. The children held out their bags. They weren't normal Halloween bags, but rough cloth sacks that looked handmade. The fabric was stained with something dark, and they smelled horrible, like meat that had been left in the sun. "Take some candy," Linda managed to say. Holding out the bowl, the child in the middle, the girl, tilted her head at an angle that wasn't quite possible for a human neck. "We can't take it. You have to give it to us. That's the rule." Linda's hand shook as she reached into the bowl and grabbed some candy for each bag. The moment the candy touched the bags, she heard a sound like sizzling, and smoke rose up. The smell got worse, sulfur mixed with rotting flesh. "Thank you," they said in that horrible unison voice. Then they turned and walked away. But they weren't walking normally. Their movements were jerky, like marionettes being controlled by invisible strings, and their feet weren't touching the ground. They were floating about an inch above her walkway, gliding more than walking. Linda slammed the door and locked it, then ran to the window to watch them leave. They were gone. Not walking away, just gone, like they had vanished the moment she closed the door. She tried to convince herself it was just an elaborate prank. Kids with really good costumes and some kind of tricks, but then she looked at the candy bowl. The pieces she had touched when giving them candy had turned black. Not melted, not burned, but black like coal, and they were cold. So cold that frost was forming on them. Linda threw the entire bowl in the garbage and tried to forget about it. She took a hot shower, made herself some tea, and went to bed early. But she couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw those children standing at her door, floating above the ground, asking for candy in those horrible voices. The next morning, she found the first mark. On her front door, burned into the solid oak, were 3 small handprints. Child-sized handprints. They were deep, like someone had pressed burning hands into the wood and held them there. The wood around the prints was charred and still warm to the touch. Linda called the police, but what could they do? They took pictures, filed a report, suggested maybe some teenagers with a blowtorch. But Linda knew better. No teenager could have made those prints. They were too perfect, too deep, and the heat required would have burned down her entire porch. She started researching, spending days in the library and online. She found stories going back decades. Every Halloween, somewhere in New England, 3 children would appear at someone's door late at night. They always asked for candy. They always left marks. And sometimes, people who gave them candy disappeared. The next year, 2019, Linda left town for Halloween. She went to stay with her daughter in California, as far from Connecticut as she could get. But when she came back, there were 3 new handprints on her door. Fresher, deeper, like the children had been angry she wasn't home. In 2020, with the pandemic, Linda thought she would be safe. She turned off all her lights, put up signs saying she wasn't giving out candy, even put caution tape across her porch. But at exactly 9:43 p.m., the doorbell rang. It rang 13 times. She didn't answer. The next morning, 3 more handprints, and her doorbell had melted. The plastic had bubbled and warped from intense heat. In 2021, Linda tried everything. She had a priest bless the house. She put salt lines at every door and window. She hung crucifixes and burned sage. She even hired a security guard to sit with her, just so she wouldn't be alone. At 9:43 p.m., the doorbell rang. The security guard went to check while Linda hid in the living room. She heard him open the door, heard him scream, then nothing. She found him unconscious on the porch. He woke up in the hospital with no memory of what happened, but he had burns on his hands. 3 small handprints burned into his palms. He quit the next day and left town. Last year, 2023, Linda didn't even try to stop them. At 9:43 p.m., she was sitting by the door, waiting. The doorbell rang. She opened it immediately. The 3 children were there. Same rotting costumes, same floating feet, same hollow voices. "We've been patient," the girl in the middle said, "but our patience is running out." "What do you want?" Linda asked. "Every year we need someone to come with us," the girl said. "Someone to join our trick-or-treating. We've been doing this for so long, so very long, since the night we died, since the night the bad man took us and did terrible things and buried us in the woods. We came back, but we came back wrong. And now we need others to join us, to make us stronger." "Why me?" Linda asked. "Because you answered the door, because you gave us candy, because you acknowledged us. Most people can't even see us, but you can. And that makes you special. That makes you ours. Tomorrow is Halloween again." Linda has made her peace with whatever is going to happen. She said goodbye to her children, though they don't know it's goodbye. She's put her affairs in order. At 9:43 p.m., she's going to answer the door. She's going to give them candy. And if they ask her to go with them, she thinks she might say yes. Because she's tired of being afraid, tired of waiting. And part of her, a part that grows stronger every day, wants to know what's on the other side of that door, wants to know where those children go when they float away into the darkness. She's left this account for whoever finds it. If she disappears tomorrow night, you'll know why. And if someday 3 children show up at your door late on Halloween night, children in rotting costumes who float instead of walk, don't answer. Don't give them candy. Don't even acknowledge them. Because once they know you can see them, they'll never leave you alone. They'll come back every year, getting stronger, getting angrier, until finally, they get what they came for. Story 5. The Halloween Party That Never Ended. James was 25 in 2022, working as a bartender in Chicago. He lived in a tiny studio apartment in a bad neighborhood, barely making enough to cover rent and food. So when his coworker Danny invited him to a Halloween party at a mansion in the wealthy suburbs, James jumped at the chance. Free food, free drinks, and a chance to see how the other half lived. Danny said his cousin knew the owner, some tech millionaire who threw legendary parties. The kind of parties that people talked about for years. The kind with celebrity guests and champagne that cost more than James made in a month. The address was in Winnetka, one of those neighborhoods where the smallest house costs $2 million. James didn't have money for an elaborate costume, so he went simple. Vampire fangs from the dollar store, a black cape from an old Halloween, and some fake blood on his chin. He looked at himself in his cracked bathroom mirror and laughed. He looked ridiculous, but it would have to do. He drove his beat-up Honda through increasingly nice neighborhoods, feeling more out of place with each mile. By the time he reached the address, he was having second thoughts. The house wasn't just a mansion, it was a castle. 3 stories of stone and glass, with towers and balconies and a driveway that could fit 50 cars. The driveway was already full of luxury cars. Ferraris, Lamborghinis, Bentleys. James parked his Honda on the street, hoping no one would have it towed. He could hear music from outside, something classical but wrong, like Mozart played backward. Lights flashed in the windows, purple and red and green, making patterns that hurt to look at. The front door was open. Not just unlocked, but standing wide open, like the house was inviting him in. People in elaborate costumes were going in and out, but something was off about them. They moved too smoothly, like they were floating. Their costumes were too perfect, too real. James saw a woman dressed as a corpse bride, but her rotting flesh wasn't makeup. He could smell the decay, see maggots moving in the wounds. A man in a werewolf costume walked past, but the fur was growing from his actual skin, and his bones were cracking and reshaping as he moved. But everyone was laughing, drinking, having a good time. Music was playing, people were dancing, champagne was flowing. So James ignored the voice in his head telling him to run and walked inside. The interior was impossible. The house was bigger on the inside than the outside. The entrance hall was the size of a football field, with a ceiling that went up forever, disappearing into darkness. The walls were covered in paintings that moved, showing scenes that changed every time he looked at them. In one, a woman was dancing. Then she was screaming. Then she was dead. Then she was dancing again. James found the bar in what looked like a ballroom from the 1700s. The bartender was dressed as a plague doctor, with one of those long bird-like masks. He didn't speak, just nodded when James asked for a beer. The beer tasted wrong, thick and warm and metallic, like blood mixed with alcohol. But James drank it anyway. He didn't want to be rude. He wandered through the house looking for Danny, but the house kept changing. Rooms led to other rooms that shouldn't exist. He went upstairs that led down, through doors that opened onto walls, down hallways that circled back on themselves. The geometry was wrong, impossible, like the house existed in more dimensions than 3. In one room, people were dancing, but they were dancing on the walls and ceiling, gravity working differently for each person. In another room, a feast was laid out, but the food was moving, crawling, trying to escape from the plates. In a third room, people were playing cards, but the cards were screaming when they were dealt. Time wasn't working right either. James looked at his phone and it said 10:15 p.m., then 3:47 a.m., then 8:23 p.m. Then the screen cracked and showed static, then repaired itself and showed a date in 1953. He found stairs that seemed to lead outside and climbed them desperately. They led to a garden, but it was wrong like everything else. The plants were meat, growing flesh and bone instead of leaves and flowers. The trees were bleeding, red sap that smelled like iron. In the center was a pool, but instead of water, it was filled with something black and thick that moved on its own. People were swimming in it, or drowning. James couldn't tell. They would go under, struggle, stop moving, then start again, like they were dying over and over. Their faces were twisted in agony, but no sound came out. James ran back inside, trying to find the exit. But the house wouldn't let him. Every door led deeper into the house. Every window showed a different view, some showing daylight, some showing other planets, some showing nothing but darkness with eyes. He found himself in a library where the books were bound in human skin, where the words rearranged themselves as he read, in a kitchen where the ovens were cooking things that screamed, in a bedroom where the bed was made of bones and the pillows were filled with teeth. Finally, after what felt like hours or days or years, he found himself back in the entrance hall. The front door was right there, still open. He could see his car outside, the normal street, the normal world. He ran for it, but the distance kept increasing. The door got farther away with each step. The hall stretched and elongated. He ran faster, but the door moved faster. Behind him he could hear laughter. Not human laughter, but something else. Something that had too many mouths. Then suddenly, he was outside. Standing by his car, the house behind him looking normal, just a big mansion with a party going on. He looked at his phone. 10:30 p.m. According to the time, he had only been inside for 15 minutes. But his costume was destroyed, torn and dirty, and covered in substances he didn't want to identify. His shoes were worn through like he had walked for miles. His hands were cut and bleeding, his nails broken, his hair gone gray at the temples. He drove home in a daze and didn't stop shaking for 3 days. He called in sick to work, then never went back. Danny never came back either. When James went to Danny's apartment, it was empty. The landlord said no one named Danny had ever lived there. James looked up the address of the mansion, but according to every map, every record, there was no house at that address. Just an empty lot that had been for sale since 1978. He drove back to check, and sure enough, empty lot. No mansion, no sign there had ever been anything there. But sometimes, in his dreams, James is back in that house, still wandering those impossible rooms, still trying to find the exit. And sometimes, when he wakes up, his sheets are dirty with garden soil, and his feet are bleeding like he's been walking all night. Last week, a year after the party, James received an invitation in the mail. Black envelope, silver writing, no return address. Inside was a card that said, "You're invited to our annual Halloween party. Same time, same place. This time, stay longer." The invitation burst into flames after he read it, but the words are burned into his mind. Halloween is tomorrow, and James knows that at 10:15 p.m. something is going to happen. Maybe he'll be transported back to that house. Maybe the house will come to him. Maybe he never really left. He's tried to prepare, packed supplies, weapons, even a GPS tracker, but he knows none of it will matter. The house doesn't follow the rules of our world. It exists outside of space and time, in a place where physics is suggestion and nightmare is reality. James has left instructions with his landlord. If he disappears, don't look for him. Don't investigate. Just forget he ever existed. Because some parties never end, some guests never leave, and some houses are hungry for souls. These 5 stories are all true. Every detail, every impossible moment, every terrifying encounter. They were shared by real people who experienced the impossible on Halloween night. People who discovered that there are things in this world, or perhaps beside this world, that we are not meant to understand. Halloween is more than just costumes and candy. It's a night when the veil between worlds grows thin, when things that shouldn't exist can cross over, when the rules that keep us safe break down. These 5 people learned that truth the hard way. So tomorrow night, when you're out celebrating Halloween, remember these stories. Remember that not every person in a costume is a person. Not every house should be entered. Not every invitation should be accepted. And not every knock on the door should be answered. Stay in groups. Stay in well-lit areas. Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. If someone seems off, they probably are. If a house appears where it shouldn't be, don't go inside. And whatever you do, if you encounter any of the things from these stories, run. Don't investigate. Don't try to understand. Just run. Because curiosity on Halloween night doesn't kill the cat. It does something much worse. It traps you in a nightmare that never ends, in a story that never stops, in a horror that follows you forever. Have a safe Halloween. Lock your doors. Check your windows, and pray that when the sun rises on November 1st, you're still in the same world you started in. Because not everyone is that lucky. Not everyone comes back unchanged, and some people never come back at all. Sweet dreams, if you can still have them after hearing these tales.